And there we are, just like clockwork. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the next episode. I'm trying to remember which one. I think this is number 2, maybe it's number 3, in a series that we call The Search for ROI. And this series is sponsored by our friends at Power Advocate. And today we are going to we're going to talk about getting value out of merger and acquisition types of activity. Of course, we're seeing a lot of that in the industry right now. I think every morning I wake up and I see another headline about somebody's buying something from someone or somebody's merging. And of course, that's nothing new to the industry. It's always going on. And whenever companies have one of these transactions, they oddly enough, they always expect to get some sort of value out the other side. And that's the idea. Of course, sometimes it's not so easy, and the value doesn't just pop out automatically. So today we want to look, we're not going to be able to cover the whole gamut of considerations. That would take considerably more than the hour that we have scheduled. But we do want to focus on mostly on the cost side, because that is where there's a lot of attention, and that's where there's a lot of ground that could either be gained or lost depending on how you execute that strategy. So that's the topic for today. Before we get into it, let me introduce our panelists. Welcome back, because all 3 of you have been on an OGGN live stream before, although I think not all together at the same time. So there's still a little bit of newness happening here. So I'm going to start with who I think is underneath me in the Hollywood Square layout, although I don't know if I'm seeing the same version that the audience is seeing. But Shawn Curley from our sponsor, Power Advocate, who was kind enough to share a panelist with us. And so, Shawn, thanks for being here and making time.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's a pleasure. Good to join you again, and looking forward to the discussion.
So I won't do the extended introduction since everybody's been on before, however entertaining those might be. But just really quickly, Shawn is a vice president at Power Advocate. I think you've been there for something like 4 years now, right? And I know your background is in consulting and finance. Anything else that you want to highlight? Tell us all about yourself.
Yeah, well, I was going to say 4 years. Geez, it feels like 50 after the last 18 months or so. Just given, well, anyway. So high level, Michael, I think you hit the key points. Background in finance and consulting, been with Power Advocate for coming up in 4 years now. For those who don't know, Power Advocate, data and analytics company, really focused on helping operators think through really top of mind challenges as it pertains to cost, operational efficiency, in an emerging way, ESG concerns, and M&A naturally is an area where we spend a lot of time as a firm. And within my group, I lead our oil and gas practice along with our natural resources practice. And sort of our team is really involved in helping operators think through the kind of the strategic challenges with unlocking value as part of really any kind of special situation, but M&A being one of them.
Right. Also, an all-star OGGN panelist. You left that out of your...
of course. That's right. So, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks. And so we'll go around the circle. Caleb All, you just keep coming back. I haven't figured out how to keep you away yet. But so
just
those of you
texting me, and I will keep showing up.
That's it. That's the step that I'm missing. And so Kayla and I have known each other for a long time. She's a good sport when it comes to being on live streams and podcasts. Right now, you're the SVP of product, right? Do I have that right at Validare? Which sounds pretty important. And but of course, you're a geologist by background. You've been in the industry a long time, long history at IHS. What else?
I think that pretty much sums it up. I think I've been acquired a few times in company settings, and I've done acquisitions many times in company settings. So Definitely see both sides of that fence.
Good. It's lucky, because we're going to come back to you on the very first question once we get through these intros. And finally at the top we have Amin Venkat, who is the CEO of this really cool little company called Spark Thought, which I think you started that company, right, a few years ago?
I did.
Or a couple of years ago or something like that. You also have a consulting background. What else should we know about you?
Short and sweet. I like that, Michael.
Okay.
Thank you for having me again.
Moving right along. And And so that's it. So that's our panel, and we're gonna just jump right into it here. I already did. I kind of already gave a little bit of the kind of set the stage of what we want to look at. But I think before we get into really the kind of the guts of how do you plan and execute to extract value from your recent transaction, maybe a little bit of landscape in terms of what is the ROI that the companies look to get from a merger and acquisition. I mean, Kayla, you mentioned that you've been through them. Lots of people have been through them, but lots of times they're just given heaps of work to do, and they just know that it has to get done. But all of that has a purpose, and hopefully all that has a purpose. So in your experience, what is it that, if you bubble up all the fury of activity, what is it that the company is looking to achieve besides just, we used to be two companies and now we're one company?
Yeah, well, and I think it depends on what side of the merger versus an acquisition that you're sitting on, right? Sure. Like mergers are very complementary. You're either shoring up assets, coring up your portfolio. Maybe there's some people synergies. Maybe there's a competitive, two are better than one mindset around competitive landscape that you might be after, versus the acquisitions can definitely be cost savings. And sometimes you can be coring up your portfolio or maybe even diversifying your portfolio. There was one, recently announced that was significant transaction that was not a single basin type of acquisition that went down. So that was interesting to see. Most of the time, though, you can achieve some synergy, either to kind of fraud off a competitive threat or, kind of survival of the fittest. Larger fish is going to get the meal in some sense.
Right. Somebody told me once upon a time that there's really no such thing as a merger. That everything is an acquisition one way or another. We were in the middle of a merger at the time, but yeah. So a whole variety of things that ultimately the company says after they plan it and we have the transaction and all the craziness starts, and we come out the other side saying we either have achieved or have not achieved our objectives. All of that, of course, depends on our even knowing whether we've achieved our objectives or knowing how are we progressing toward that depends on being able to kind of assess where you are and understand the data and understand what's going on with your operations, and just some of that is what rolls up, some of that is being in the trenches. So speaking of being in the trenches, I mean, you do a lot of this kind of on the ground consulting work. Also, you guys are working with data and analytics. How do you like help somebody, or how does a company just even appraise where they are in the progress and understand if they're succeeding or not?
Sure. I mean, you can look at it in two ways, right? And the two folds are data and process support. So for data, you gather time-oriented, integrated data from multiple sources, which is critical. Centralizing, digitizing your data where the leaders can make an informed decision, based on that real-time data is critical. And then for process support, you can incorporate a management system. And by that, I mean, investing in a software with BI capabilities makes a powerful impact and supply chain efficient. So these tools basically automate an essential workflows that are required by the company.
Right. So it's that easy, really. You just need that.
I mean, those are the two folds. The way we go in, keep it simple.
Those two things and you're good to go. So
it gets a little complicated after those two things.
Yeah. That's why you need help. So, okay, so that's sort of the broad landscape. I mentioned today that we wanted to focus mostly on the cost. I mean, a big portion of the value lives on the cost side, which of course gets into supply chain and operational efficiencies and things like that. So we want to try to cover all that. Shawn, you guys, Power Advocate is like, this is right in your wheelhouse. So help us with the discussion today. How are we going to how are we going to sort of steer into the most important things? What do we want to look at?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's multiple layers, I guess, to the question. If you assume and believe that synergies are attainable in any kind of corporate merger or acquisition scenario, and I agree with Kayla that typically that is the case. Otherwise, the deal wouldn't happen.
Right.
Generally speaking, in the simplified view of the world, there's two ways that can happen. There's sort of like the internal things you can do, that's org, that's process, redundancy, those types of things. Then there's the external things you can do, and that's really based on your partnerships with everyone from your vendors to your financial partners, to the way your asset footprint looks on a map, and the result of that operationally. I think the internal piece is pretty straightforward. It's not so complicated to understand that 2x the number of people to run one company might not be the requirement. There's organizational efficiencies, et cetera. The external opportunities are, I think, maybe less obvious. And certainly the scale and opportunity set related to those external opportunities is less obvious. And in particular around supply chain and organizing your new operating footprint and the way with which you partner with your vendors according to your new size and scale is really a tremendous value creation lever for firms that, as Aman and Kayla sort of alluded to, it might not be so clear the pathway to get there. So, the way we think about that kind of that world is really kind of focusing on the three key opportunity drivers within that specific segment of value creation. So if you're looking at supply chain specifically and looking at specifically how to drive synergy value in supply chain, of which again it's a considerable part of your total synergy portfolio in an M&A. First, it's arbitrage, right? So better contracts on one side of the house versus the other. That's pretty simple. The second is scale. The scale piece is sort of intuitive, but not necessarily so clear how big an impact that can be. And we have a really specific point of view on what that could mean. And specifically, what kind of buyer you can be for key equipment services as a combined entity versus an independent entity. And then finally, because of all of this action that takes place in any kind of M&A scenario, it's sort of a natural opportunity to reset your performance versus your broader peer group and to benchmark your contracts, benchmark your costs on a dollar per foot basis or whatever the metric you're looking at, and kind of taking the next step to reevaluate your entire cost program so that you are not only extracting the value from the M&A scenario, but also ensuring that you're level set with the rest of the market for all of your critical services, your critical equipment, et cetera.
Yeah. Good. So so you covered a lot of ground there. We need to. I want to back up. So those are some really good kind of foundational building blocks for this. If we back up a little bit and kind of start to break that down, the first thing is and Kayla, you mentioned earlier. You mentioned there can be some synergies, so what, as an industry insider, what do you see? So sort of in light of everything that Shawn just said, like, what makes your ears perk up and say, like, that really helps to drive synergies and make us able to execute, better on these strategies?
I think, well, and I'm probably biased because I come from the technology side of the industry.
Sure, right.
But, I always see innovation and technology adoption as the great equalizer in any of these situations. I have spent many times almost in mourning where I see, just a really old school, slow moving, slow to come up the adoption curve organization pick up, a really fresh, innovative, forward thinking type of group and then just, consume their assets and not change the business practice from everything that the lean, agile, nimble company was leveraging to be that way. And a lot of times it comes from a technology perspective. I think, and I've been in situations before where we've had an acquisition and people get a little overwhelmed with making too many decisions in the process. A lot of times people will say, and I've even been guilty of this myself, give us like a quarter to work through this deal to get everything lined out. And what they're really doing is putting the blinders on and saying, okay, I'm going to take everything about this organization or this asset set or this group of people, and I'm going to force it into my system, my process of doing things, my way of running the business. And they're missing the critical, kind of silver lining of even doing a merger acquisition where, I see it as a chance to come up for air and really evaluate the landscape of their business and the landscape of how they function in their supply chain and the processes they adopt. That would be my kind of like single inflection point of, you can tell which way a deal is going to go. It's either going to go really well and it's going to launch into orbit, or it's just going to like smolder until the fire burns out kind of situation.
So it's good. It's good to know that some of them launch into orbit. And I can tell by your face, even though you're trying to keep your best live stream countenance, I can tell that you're thinking, you're going, yes, I have seen that one before. I've seen that one before. Which of course, all of that impacts a company's ability to execute on some of the strategies that Shawn mentioned. What makes the difference, or how do you advise people when you go into those scenarios to improve their ability to execute by overcoming some of those things that Kayla was just talking about?
Sure. I mean, just imagine, since we're in orbit, just imagine a target, which is value, right? Yeah. So if both parties are looking at the value add, which includes your planning, your process, and quality. So PPQ, right? What is the product that's being made and when is it being made? Having robust planning systems. How is the product being made and how to add value while it's being made? And then quality on how to collaborate with outside in, making sure the quality is at 100%, right? So if you package that together and just kind of execute that pattern, that helps, because this is again through the supply chain lens, right? So when you have those three components line up, it kind of provides the right value.
Yeah, that's so I mean it's kind of a methodology, right? If you follow a methodology, then instead of just whatever else everybody's doing. I mean, so Kayla, just to go back to you for a second, like she just kind of packaged that up very neatly, right? Is that something that can you take that approach and like drop that into like a real live organization and make a difference?
I think you can. I think what most people, and it's just human nature, are unwilling to admit is that the ego-driven decisions kick into overdrive in a situation like an M&A.
Yeah.
I've seen people where, we're looking at the numbers and the math doesn't lie, and they're deciding one way because it's their comfort zone. It's what they're familiar with. It allows them to maintain their sense of authority, their usefulness within the organization. And, yes, at its most simplistic form, these things are relatively simple. It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
But yeah,
if we just took all the people out, it would be so much easier. Right.
the emotion out of it, and the need to control and maintain that sense of self-worth is the biggest issue.
Right. Okay. So Shawn, let's pretend that Amit and Kayla have gone in and they've done their thing and they've got everybody like in a happy state now, and everybody's working together with a nice process and methodology. Coming back to your, you kind of mentioned these three. So now we have a nice, healthy environment to go execute on this strategy. So let's break down that strategy a little bit more, because you mentioned three things: arbitrage, scale, benchmarking. Of course, I think you were talking about, because you originally talked about the inside view versus the outside view. Some of what we were just describing was sort of the internal churning. If we could get that squared away, now how do we look outside and really like ratchet up that value?
Yeah, it's great point. Yeah, so it's kind of to Kayla and Aman's points around the internal pieces, kind of getting that squared away. The 3 points I had previously mentioned. So I guess the value drivers, if you will, kind of externally, new operator in the marketplace. There's 3 ways in which there's new value creation. One is scale, arbitrage, benchmarking. It's sort of interesting in that if you think about the new operators being a completely new participant in the marketplace, I think it's a little bit easier to think about why these are all value levers to begin with, as opposed to presuming that the legacy of the kind of old co-operators will kind of continue. So in a scale perspective, again, I think relatively straightforward to think about, but in some sense, the new operator is now twice the size of the old, or it's 2x the size of what it was previously. Yeah. Not to mention the fact that depending on what basin you're in, or if it's a single basin acquisition or even a cross basin acquisition, now you have one fewer buyer in the marketplace with which the suppliers can do business. And so there's sort of this element of buying power that gets created for NewCo, where the leverage that the new operator has in the marketplace is significantly increased, and in some cases more than in just a 1 + 1 = 2 scenario. Might be even more than that, and it's specifically because of this this combined effect of bigger and also one less in the marketplace. And so that manifests itself in a variety of ways, but primarily in pricing that you get from your suppliers and the volumes with which you can purchase goods and material and services, which, as everyone I think knows, shopping on Amazon, the more you buy, typically you get a discount associated with that. And it's in some ways the fastest way to reduce your cost basis if you're able to scale your operation effectively and buy the same thing at scale. I think the arbitrage piece is maybe a little bit more complicated to execute, but also simple in theory. Old co-operator A versus old co-operator B. One has a better cementing services contract. Let's use that one instead. Right. It's very unlikely that it's so neatly aligned. Maybe different suppliers, maybe a slightly different job design. There's all sorts of operational characteristics that you may have to take into account. Not to mention the fact that identifying that contract to begin with isn't always so easy, depending on the data systems. As to Aman's point,
yeah, there's a whole nother live stream on that.
Right. I mean, it could be that the contract's living in somebody's filing cabinet, and it's hard to reconcile.
It could also be that no one's ever read the contract, right?
So likely the case. Yeah. And so, but that opportunity is very real, because you multiply the savings outcomes associated with that sort of sequence. You think about the hundreds and hundreds of contracts that 2 operators might have, the likelihood that they're equal is probably pretty nil. And so there's always going to be a delta, and that delta is value that you can capture. The hard part is finding it. And again, that's sort of where, to Aman and Kayla's points, getting the internal processes right and the systems right is so critical. And then the last piece, Michael, to your question, the benchmarking concept, it's really sort of taking advantage of the fact that you have all of this tailwind behind you with regards to thinking in terms of synergy, thinking in terms of operational efficiency, and thinking in terms of cost cutting. And there's no better way to evaluate whether or not you're doing a good job at that than by benchmarking yourself to the broader marketplace. Sure. And of course, it's not sufficient if you are a merged operator to understand whether or not you're at market average. You probably want to be better than that, right? So I think the process really is to identify where you want to be. Do you want to be top decile? Do you want to be top quartile? Are you okay with being top decile in one thing, but not top decile in another? Rationalizing your positioning relative to your broader peer set across all of the categories of spend you have, and then confirming whether or not you've achieved those goals. And if you haven't, you've done all the hard work of aligning your data, aligning your processes, building a new team, and identifying where scale and arbitrage can matter to action where you feel you're not where you want to be from a cost perspective.
Right. Yeah, no, good. Yeah. So that all, yeah, you can see how all of those things tie together. Kaylin, there was various periods of smirking during some of those things. So what are you guys thinking about? Just jump right in. As we're laying out all those different components, so what are you thinking about?
I was just thinking data management systems. That's what I was thinking, and the lack of. We walked into offices where there are just files, lined up, and unfortunately, certain industries are slower than the others. So that's what I was smiling about.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I had the thought in my mind that, every time a merger happens, a supplier gets their wings, because it is just absolutely brutal, because, they're trying to protect their market share as well. And now they're looking at a 50% cost reduction because one company is just completely gone, never to return again. And then the other aspect I see is kind of goes back to Aman's point about the data management. There tends to be a lot of hoarding when it comes to legacy and vintage data. I've gone into situations where I'm like, are we sure we need these 13 exact copies of this same project?
Yes. Yes, we do. I actually, I've been on the losing end. And as a supplier, I've been on the losing end of those things where you have this fantastic client, you're doing, not just fantastic in terms of, financially, which of course we need to stay in business, but like you're doing some great stuff together, like really doing some great stuff together. And they just get like bought wholesale by some other player who does things a completely different way, has arrangements with completely different suppliers, and and it is I like that supplier gets its wings. So Shawn, when you guys go into these kind of real world scenarios, so you've got so you're looking to, you get these things in your sights, right? These targets in your sights, like what can we get on account of our scale now that we're, and we're one bigger one instead of two smaller ones. You've got, who's got the best contracts that we can leverage. You've got, and then the whole benchmarking thing. But at the same time, as Aman and Kayla mentioned, you have these data management challenges, these data hoarding issues. So now it gets kind of messy, right? So what do you where do you start and how do you navigate through that?
Yeah, another great question.
If you could answer that concisely, that would be though.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I tend to be long-winded.
No, I just meant that it's a really complicated question.
It certainly is. So I think that the short answer is I think Power Advocate takes the view, and I'm sure that just based on the comments, Aman and Kayla would agree that if you can get the data sorted out, a lot of this becomes a lot easier. So when we think about these situations, it's really step one, let's get the data right. The tricky part is that it's all on a clock. The second an announcement happens, everyone in the marketplace is sort of taking actions to prepare for the fact that this new co will exist, including suppliers. And in the case of new co, oftentimes it can be tricky to prepare for yourself because the merger hasn't closed yet. The deal has been announced, but it hasn't been inked. And so it's really important to think through how you can do as much preparation work as you possibly can in advance so that day one merger close, you can start actioning opportunity to accrue savings and maximize run rate savings as quickly as possible. Because as we saw with the turbulence in the market over the last 18 months, opportunity can vanish in a blink, depending on what oil price does, depending on what commodity prices do, et cetera. And so you really want to be prepared. So our view or our sort of approach to this is to establish clean room methodologies to get the data right up front so that from an analytics standpoint, there's zero lag time from merger close to action, and that the insights are drawn out, the data is prepared, and the ability to execute is really limited only by personnel and bandwidth versus data or identification of opportunity. And so that's critical in our view. And then from there, it's really just about actioning the opportunities that you've identified.
Yeah. So so getting the data right first, of course. What's the and I don't know who's the best person to answer this question, but what's the expectation? So if I'm in charge of making one of these things be successful, how long is it going to take me to get the data right? Right? How hard is that going to be? And I don't know. I mean, maybe you've had some projects along those lines, but like, how do you set expectations to say, well, here's what it's going to take to get there, and it's not going to take 2 days? What does that look like in real life?
It depends on the amount of data, right? So that has a lot to do with it.
Sure.
And we have implemented Power Advocate on some client sites. So it is a seamless, technology and management system. So first is matching expected M&A benefits for their organization and what their goals are, right? So if they are aggressive, then we make sure that it's done at a certain pace. Now then there's evaluation criteria, identifying target organizations, what departments are needed to be roped into it, and then prioritizing the organizational list, and then building it out based on profiles.
Yeah. How do you what do you recommend in terms of driving an initiative like that? Sometimes somebody who also has a job of some sort suddenly gets like saddled with this project, right? To go, and it's not their main thing, and now they have to go, like, all those things that you just said, like, fall into a project plan, and somebody has to drive and execute that. If I'm the poor soul that just got that job, what do I do?
Well, you have to kind of
I call you back. Probably. I would call you personally, but what would,
thank what would somebody else do? Yeah, I mean, you have to kind of step back and just look at, what am I doing here, right? I'm trying to bring value. So it kind of folds into operational efficiency, because it means, to me, that means just improving a customer's journey, right? Who are you serving? And you're improving that. So once you take that step back and look and get bought into it, then you start seeing what the bigger picture is. What are you adding to the value for the organization and the organizations that are merging together? Right. So, and nowadays it's no longer an option, being efficient.
Yeah. Well, I got the first part right, I think, because I frequently ask myself, what am I doing here? But so Kayla, I can tell by your face, like, you're thinking some things there. I know you've been in I know you've been the person who suddenly had some like project that said, in addition to your regular job, now do this. So what else can you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say learning from painful lessons of the past for myself personally is, a lot of times the broader context is not provided to the teams actually doing the work. So there is no formal, everyone involved is going to have a kickoff. Here's the overarching plan from a high level. Here's the value we hope to create out of it. Here's how you and your specific piece play into that process and the role of value creation. Because you can find yourself quite frequently, looking at piles and piles of data going, why am I even looking at this right now? Like, is anyone going to care about this information 6 months from now? Or, looking at old assets and, trying to figure out, well, what is throwaway? What do I need to keep? And really, I feel like people don't pair in these situations very well. Someone from the legacy company, someone from the other legacy company, working together, because I think most of the hard decisions are not around compiling the data, looking at data management aspects of it. from a baseline perspective. It's all the interpretation of that data. It's the derivative information that's been generated from the underlying data that really tends to be the negotiation of, geologist A says it's this, geologist A on this side says it's this. So which is actually the truth of between the two companies' interpretation of the same underlying data?
Yeah. So, so Shawn, I'm saving all the hard questions for you. If again, I'm kind of coming back to if we do those things and we get that right and we take all of the wisdom and guidance that we're getting from and Kayla, let's come back. And then if we have the strategy that you laid out with these 3 pillars of scale and arbitrage and benchmarking, what is the kind of value that we can expect or maybe not so much in the abstract, but in your experience, right, with Power Advocate, maybe some examples of how you've seen people able to get like this much value instead of this much value, right? And maybe sprinkle in a little bit, because Amin mentioned that they've implemented Power Advocate, and so Power Advocate isn't just people, right? But you guys have a product. Of course, we don't want this to become an infomercial, but maybe in the context of when you go in there and you're using the tool set that you have, what kind of value have you seen people be able to get that is maybe surprising to them, and they think, wow, this is much better than we expected?
Yeah, sure.
If you don't have any of those stories, then we'll just skip to the
No, I have plenty. Well, maybe I'll share 2 examples that I think are interesting, and maybe highlight how within that strategic framework, the pathway you take can be quite different depending on the circumstance, the category you're talking about. So just as context, I'll note, so we work with, over 100 operators, tons of data. And when we evaluate the impact of scale, okay, so, and I should say over 100 operators, large and small, right? So we have a good view of kind of what the landscape looks like in terms of who achieves what from a pricing perspective. And we know for sure that it's not equal, right? It's not the case that everyone is paying the same price for the same things. When we evaluate the impact of scale purchasing on different categories, we note that there's a distribution of deltas observed depending on the category we're talking about. So for call it your commodities, repeatable purchases of equipment that's generally pretty standard. OCTG is a great example of that. You tend to see a much larger delta between the large operators and the small operators in a given basin, to the tune of 15 to 20%. And that's specifically because the big operators can buy at scale, and they can buy differently than the small operators. Bigger operators have more opportunities to buy direct to mill. They have bigger relationships with distributors, and so that's real. And so if you're going through a merger or an acquisition, that's real value. You can climb up the distribution of pricing you pay based on the scale purchasing that you can achieve. Not the case necessarily with something like frac or rigs, perhaps, where it's more of a services oriented purchase. There is, call it a fixed supply in some sense, and with a variant market on the buyer side, including those who are incentivized to operate their business differently than a larger operator, i.e., a smaller operator who is incentivized to drill quickly and complete wells quickly. The purchasing dynamics are not so aligned with who's big, who's small. It really has more to do with sort of who wants it most in some respect. And because of that, you see a lot more, you still see variance in the pricing, but it has less to do with scale and has more to do with, other factors such as, relationship with the vendor, ability to incentivize the vendor with a contract structure that does not rely independently on day rate, et cetera. And so in those instances, scale doesn't necessarily get you there, but an observation of arbitrage does. So perhaps the operator, old co A versus old co B, running a very similar type of rig, but perhaps there are more favorable terms in one contract, or perhaps there's an observation that it's two different suppliers for frac, and one of the suppliers is notably more efficient on a dollar per stage basis when you evaluate the total cost of ownership of those two relationships. And so in other words, the strategy framework can be applied differently to different areas of your supply chain and different areas of your costs. But the net result is that utilizing that framework against your entire cost basis gives you some indication of what the savings opportunity is against each of those levers for all your categories. And it'll be variant, right? Again, so scale will matter in some areas, it won't in others. But the net of it all is that it gives you some indication of what the savings opportunity is for any given area of your AFE or of your LOE budget. And that depending on the category, depending on the operator, that can be anywhere between low single digits to 20+%, depending on the gaps in costs and pricing that you see between the two operators.
Yeah, well, that's significant. Even single digits could be significant.
Right.
I mean, in any given year, if you could go to somebody and say, if you do this, that, and this, you can reduce your cost by 6% this year. like anybody would sign up for that program. But everything that you just described sounds like, wow, that's like a lot of analysis. And as Amin and Kayla mentioned, we don't actually even know where that data is, and nobody has read those contracts. Right? I think I said that part. So what? How do you and Amin, you've implemented, and Shawn, you are kind of coming from the supplier side of giving somebody something with which they can do this. What is that? How do you take that whole really difficult or complex thing that you just described and turning it into something that I believe that we can actually execute and get that done?
Yeah, so I think it's the short answer is that it's cleansing and classifying data in the right way. The longer answer is that it's aggregating perhaps dozens of data sources into a single data cube, applying different technologies to align the data to be readable with one another. And that can be, disparate ERP systems that have just fundamentally different structures and different accounting rules and codings to align all of that information to, requirements around OCR technologies applied to oily glove invoices that, were left in a Dropbox in the field that gets collected somewhere along the way and kind of lives in a dusty filing cabinet. Right.
So Amin, you've been can you you've been in these projects. Can you you can get there from here? Can you say that like wherever you are, we can get you can get there from here?
Sure. And let me see if I can package it again.
Okay.
Right. To make it simple. So first, just choose an area to improve, right? And then define that process scope that will be undertaken. Isolate potential partners for comparison. And then you can move on to identifying data sources, where you get your information, all the sources. Once you collect your data, you isolate the differences in that data, as well as your process. And then you can set goals for change, move on to communicating those goals internally and externally, and then aligning goals and implement them, and then view the results and adjust based on what you find.
Thank you. Actually, it is helpful to hear it one more time, just in the context of kind of as we've thought through all the various parts and pieces. But so Kayla, you've also been on the supplier side in some regards, maybe not for fracking equipment, but for things that companies, you had clients that had some pretty large contracts. What if you as a supplier, what would be the advice that you would give the people who are trying to do this thing that Shawn and Amin are describing, where we want to extract as much value as we can by all those smart things. As a supplier, what guidance would you give them that says this is going to help you and it's going to help us, help us, help you?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably reiterate that a lot of suppliers do see it as a partnership. We don't, turn our phones off the minute a contract is signed and we pass the logins over. We really care about the efficiency of the user community within that organization, facilitating a best practice. And so I would say even lean on the suppliers more so than they typically do, because you can get really straightforward guidance into some of the back-end architecture around these systems. You can get the suppliers to work together on what the differences between the systems are to help shape some of those decisions, so you don't have to, get in there and figure out all of these things on your own. And then also, on the back of the decisions and best practice being implemented, the suppliers can really help with the training and the ramp up and the efficiency improvements of the individual humans who are going to be doing the work or using the platforms or utilizing the data. We see that as an ongoing process continuously.
So, So the very first thing you said was suppliers see it as a partnership. So is that really true? The
good suppliers do.
Yeah, the good ones.
I mean, I've always seen it as it's mutually beneficial. It's in a mutual best interest for me to make champions out of my product and users, and also for them to leverage me around all of the best practice I see in other parts of the industry, right? I think a lot of people, especially in M&A activities, can kind of turn inward and look behind their own four walls, their own process, their own data. And what they don't necessarily recognize is that suppliers are partnering with everyone in the space. So we may have seen this exact same scenario and done something about it before, or we may have indicators, what Shawn was saying around the benchmarking around like, okay, well, here's actually what great looks like, and here are the steps that you can take to get there. Yeah.
So don't be afraid to trust your suppliers and try to work with them, obviously within the construct that you feel comfortable with. Shawn and Amin, anything, so you're all kind of from the supplier side in one way or another. Anything else to add on to that?
I mean, I would just echo what Kayla just said. Achieving the highest level of operational efficiency will require the manufacturers' partners to collaborate to a greater degree, so that way they are, the best in the field. Yeah.
So I think we're kind of winding down on time here, and I think we've pretty much covered everything we wanted to. Shawn, anything else? Any kind of like wrapping up sort of thoughts or anything we left out that we want to make sure that we mention?
Nothing. I don't think nothing that we left out, and really appreciate the conversation. I think it was a good one. Maybe just as a wrapper, none of this is in a vacuum. Or obviously there's new deals happening all the time, and it's really interesting that the impact that all of this has on the broader trends and costing for all operators. And so in some respect, the impact to a peer who is not executing an M&A may be in some smaller way just as relevant. And so, we're as a firm, I think we're really excited to, support our partners and customers as best we can, as those who are taking corporate action do so, and those who are not, continue to evolve their cost basis and their organizational structure with the evolving market.
Yeah. Good. Thanks. I mean, we don't. I think that wraps it up nicely. We don't see. I mean, the M&A activity is obviously going to continue for not that it ever stops completely, but there's certainly a lot of it going on now, and we're probably going to see some more. So this is all good stuff. Thanks to everybody in our audience for tuning in. This is a series that we call the Search for ROI, and today we're talking about deal value creation and how to actually the things that you need to think through do to actually get that value that you expected to get, and maybe even a little bit more after those merger and acquisition transactions are complete. So this is a series. I think we're going to have another one coming up fairly soon. So tune into that. Also want to remind everybody that OGGN, the Oil and Gas Global Network, we got new podcasts coming out. We have all kinds of new programs coming out. We got the return of the OGGN happy hours. So a lot going on, lots of new stuff this year. So go to OGGN.com to see what's happening. Look for us on LinkedIn. You can join the street team. There's all kinds of cool things that you can do, and to get involved with the Oil and Gas Global Network. Thanks to our panelists again for coming back again, and it's always great to have you guys on. We had Aman Venkat, who is the CEO of SparkThought, and Kayla Ball, who is the SVP of product for Validator, and Shawn Curley, of course, Vice President for Power Advocate. If you're interested in what any of these people are doing, turns out they all have websites, and their websites are all the same name as their company. So if you go to sparkthought.com, or if you know how to spell validator.com, it's Validere, right, Kayla? Is that correct? Validator.com, or just look for Kayla on LinkedIn, or poweradvocate.com, and you can learn more about what all these folks are doing. That's going to wrap it up for today, and hopefully we will see you back for the next one.